Okay, it's recording now, so you can let people in. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give folks a couple minutes to arrive. So please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and the name of the place where you'll be taking your students out or yourself out to this year. Or the name of any place really that you feel connected to. Okay, awesome. And while everybody's doing that, I want to welcome you all to the third part of our 4-part webinar series. Thank you and Chimigwech to every single one of you for joining us tonight, both new and returning participants. Our intention for this 4-part series remains supporting you during these continuously challenging times, with some suggestions for taking your learning outdoors in a good way and in a naturally curious way. And we've already learned so much from you and with you throughout this series, so thank you again. And tonight we're really excited to build on this conversation in the context of virtual teaching and learning, and how we might bring the natural world into these spaces where the children are. I'm Rosa, and I am the program manager of Natural Curiosity, and I'm a guest on Turtle Island. Natural Curiosity, as you know, is an environmental education program that is part of OISE at University of Toronto and the Laboratory School. And the Lab School is an inquiry-based K-6 school that is part of the university. And I'm so grateful to be working and living in the traditional territories of the Petun, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and other nations whose names we no longer remember because of the impact of colonialism. This territory was also subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies and later all allied nations to peaceably share and care for the land, the water, the animals, the insects, and all of the life around the Great Lakes. And I want to start tonight's webinar with the recognition that this covenant, from what I've been taught by many Indigenous educators, and I've had the privilege of attending lots of professional learning, is that this covenant was first a treaty that was made between people and the earth. And Rick Hill, who is a Six Nations elder, I think summed it up best in 3 key ideas. 1, to take only what we need from the dish. 2, to keep that dish clean. And 3, always leave something in the dish for everybody else, including the dish. And under that agreement, we are all treaty people. And so, yeah, Natural Curiosity, we support educators across Turtle Island with incorporating an inquiry approach to environmental learning, as well as the importance of Indigenous perspectives in this work. And I will now pass it off to Asha, who is one of our work study students and an incredible member of our team.
Great, thanks, Rosa. So before we get into the webinar today, we just have a few housekeeping notes. So first of all, we ask that you please stay muted so we can hear our presenters more clearly. To make sure that you're muted, you can just check the mic button on the bottom left corner of your screen. It should have a red line through it. If it does not, you can just click on it and it should appear. Please as well keep your video turned off so that the webinar can run smoothly. The more videos we have running, the more choppy things can get for folks with internet troubles. And if you have any questions or you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please privately message any member of the NC team. You can find us in the chat by searching NC in the To field. We're also recording this webinar for you all to access later, so you receive that by email along with the chat records of our discussion and a list of resources, all of those that come up in our conversation today. So I wanted to pass it over to our program director, Haley Higdon, who has recently come back from her maternity leave. She was our managing editor of the second edition, which has been guiding and sharing our learning over the past few years. And Haley will be introducing our two guests tonight, who also have deep experience and knowledge on the second edition resource and the principles and practices laid out there. So thank you, Haley.
Thank you. Well, yes, my name is Haley Higdon, and I am a guest on Turtle Island. And I am so excited to be back with the Natural Curiosity team that just keeps growing, which is exciting because it was quite small for a long time. So having other members supporting the amazing work that is happening and coming back to an even bigger team is wonderful. Tonight, I'll talk a little bit about the overview of tonight's webinar. And well, this is an overview that you're all looking at. And then after that, Tanya and Natasha will each share a presentation followed by a conversation. And then following their conversation, we'll read out your questions that you have come up with throughout the chat. This is a dedicated time for your questions, and it will be about 20 minutes. But of course, if you come up with any questions throughout the webinar, please add them in the chat. So questions, ideas, comments, we welcome them all. And then in the last 10 minutes, we have some exciting announcements about new initiatives and resources from NC, from Natural Curiosity, as well as an exit ticket activity and a poll. So if you could stick around until then, that would be great, because your feedback is so important to us and helps us figure out where we're going from here, what other possible webinars we might host, and it supports the work that we do. So now I am so honored to introduce our two guests for tonight. Tanya Murray and Natasha Bascevan. And I am so lucky to have worked with these incredible women in the past. So Tanya I met in, I think it was about 2014 when I just started with Natural Curiosity. And we were running workshops. Unfortunately, we were running two separate workshops, but we got to meet each other there. And then since then, we've come, our paths have crossed both indoors and the best experiences were obviously outdoors. But, you know, Tanya grew up in both urban and rural spaces and climbing trees and mucking about in Ontario ravines and exploring on wilderness trips. And she seeks out connection with the land and always lets her heart lead the way. She's worked in the outdoors as a wilderness guide, an adventure education facilitator, and at an independent school serving vulnerable youth. And she's also been working with the York Region District School Board for over 13 years, where she has championed nature connection that is accessible to all students. Before COVID, actually, now she's back in her role as a curriculum consultant supporting system leadership in outdoor and environmental education. She did have a stint in the classroom earlier this year, well, not in the classroom, the virtual classroom, both her and Natasha, but now both of them are back in their original roles. Tanya is drawn to inquiry, place-based and land-based education, and she champions collaborative, transformative, anti-oppression platforms that support student voice and belonging. And yeah, I'm so glad to welcome Tanya tonight. And Natasha is Anishinaabe and Métis, And from my understanding, Kwe is the Anishinaabe-Moan word for woman. Natasha, you can maybe confirm that when you start your conversation. And she's currently residing in Georgina. Her family is from Red River, Maniwaki, and Sudbury, and she's the Indigenous Education Consultant for York Region District School Board. And I had the pleasure of attending the Think Indigenous conference in Edmonton with her a couple years ago. And that was a really great experience, and also great to know somebody when you're in a new territory and in a new setting. She's also completing her Master's of Education at OISE in Leadership, Policy, and Change. And she has worked with the early years, primary, junior, and intermediate students with their families and community organizations for the last 10 years. And these include Kids for Turtles, community living, family literacy, and respite programs. And she also supports various advocacy committees to support knowledge mobilization of truth and reconciliation action in municipalities. And she's also the core team member of the Turtle Island Journal of Indigenous Education. She champions practical applications of decolonizing and indigenizing by including community elements of survivance, resistance, and resurgence. And Natasha has taught me a lot of things as we've learned together. And one of them was when I had to look up survivance, when I looked over her bio. And Natasha, maybe you can speak a little bit to that. But when I looked it up, it said an act of survivance is an Indigenous self-expression in any medium that tells a story about our, I'm guessing, Indigenous active presence in the world now. Survivance is more than mere survival. It is a way of life that nourishes Indigenous ways of knowing. So thank you again for teaching me something. And I also had the honor of creating a collaborative professional development experience. This is a photo of us at our first Lighting the Fire professional development experience with educators from York Region School Board. And we, Natural Curiosity, collaborated with both Tanya and Natasha and other educators with the school board to provide workshops on the land following the 4 branches of Natural Curiosity. So I know that what they're going to share tonight is going to be really thoughtful and inspiring, and also figuring out how to do it in a digital context. So welcome. Oh, the one other thing I want to say is, I'm rambling, I'm sorry, but the next slide is, I've also had the privilege of meeting both Natasha and Tanya's families on the land, which I think is more powerful than any of the other learning that we did in a professional context. This was another conference, but children were also invited. So I was able to meet their children, and I was actually pregnant at the time. So that's just wanted to end with that, with family, with the land, and with connection. So welcome to Tanya and Natasha, and I look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thank you, Haley, for that introduction, and it has been really a lovely journey. I think that I am a better educator, a better mom, probably a better friend and a community member because of my relationship with Natural Curiosity. First the book, and then the people, and the people are absolutely wonderful. And anytime I have a chance to work with any of you, it's been magic. So I'm humbled to be here. I've been following all the webinars, and I've really been carrying a lot of those teachings with me for the last little while, and just really appreciate the chance to share maybe a little bit about what we've been learning. And my land acknowledgement tonight is based on a gratitude for a space I was able to share with 60 grade 4 students virtually these past 2 weeks. As I was, Haley mentioned, we were both, Natasha and I, on an emergency redeployment from our positions to be in service of these two classes that didn't have a teacher yet. And the land that I took them virtually to is on the traditional territory 4 of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. And as someone who works for York Region, our closest partners in education are the Chippewas of Georgina Island. So I wanted to recognize them in the learning that I've done there. I would love to just offer an invitation of what a co-created land acknowledgement might look like as you get to know your spaces. So I saw all kinds of familiar faces signing in today, which was really nice. Many of them are local York Region teachers. Many of them I know from work in Ottawa, which is really lovely to see you. But what does that look like to lift a land acknowledgement outside of the paper or outside of the script, outside of the to-do list? And whether it's virtual or in person, is it a message of gratitude or is it a message of hope? And really, I think, even though it sounds like it was a really short time teaching in the elementary virtual classroom, I learned so much. And I think it was really about starting to uncover those layers of what came before, what's happening now on the land, and what do we hope for in the future. And if I had the opportunity and the gift to be able to continue with those students, that's what we would just be continuing to layer on. So that land acknowledgement just came to life. I want to just acknowledge too that I am so grateful for the takeaway messages for the last webinar that resonated with me and came at such a perfect time right before this redeployment. It was Doug and Maria spoke about really, I think, slowing down around the fire. They spoke about knowing where we are and where we're going. They spoke about speaking from your heart, which if you know me, I often say that. And instead of a place of panic and anxiety, which after doing this 2 weeks in elementary school, I think that's where a lot of us are right now, is a place of panic and anxiety, and letting the natural laws of the land come forward. So I just really wanted to thank them for offering that the last time. Doug also suggested this idea of how do we be in community together. And that was like a little message. Little Doug was sitting on my shoulder, I think, as we were taking the kids outside, you know, thinking about how do we meet people outside in a different way than we ever have before. I lasted 1 day in front of the screen, as you'll see in a second, before taking the kids outside. And as we do that, you know, how are we really centering children and listening to their questions and letting them guide the next day or the next thing that we do? The students that I'm probably going to showcase a little bit of work deserve some credit. So I'd like to thank them for inspiring me for the 2 weeks, really teaching me so much. They're woven in and out of this story that I'm going to share with you. I said to Rosa and Brenda when we first spoke that although it was really, really hard to teach 2 groups of 30 grade 4 students at once, it was the biggest gift that I probably could have received as a curriculum consultant. And I think I will be in better service to our system, having had that experience and knowing really truly what it's like to be a student who's learning from a screen, or a family who's trying to support them, or an educator who's trying to juggle all of this. So I'm really grateful for that. I'd like to thank my colleague, Gina and Natasha, who kind of traveled through these 2 weeks together as we explored how to teach virtually on the land. And we shared some ideas, so I'm grateful for them. And also grateful for all those who have been a visitor, or either human or non-human visitor, who have really sparked learning and grounded me, helped me unlearn something, or helped me disrupt something that was not helpful, or helped me, you know, really laid the groundwork for a new or an old way of doing or being or knowing. So just wanted to lay out those thank yous before sharing a little bit about this experience. So here we go. The next slide gives you a little snapshot. Day 1 is me on the inset, 5 hours in front of the screen, and I ditched that pretty quickly. Day 2, I took the learning outside. And I think my office, if anyone knows me, has always really been outside, but it was a really big shift. And a virtual platform is very different in terms of how to be in community with kids who you feel like you're talking to a brick wall. And for those of you who have already done this, I applaud you, and I would love to talk to you, and I'm sure I would have learned so much from what you have been experiencing since September. But it is a tough role. But we know we have to invest that time in bringing a community together, that intentionality, that dedication of not diving into curriculum right away, but building that community, I found was really critical, especially online. And I think that being in community, as Doug would say, happens all year, but that foundation is critical for just setting the group up for success. So in a moment, I'm going to show you a video, but the next slide just shows you a few of the picture books that we used, because as we started thinking about how to frame, and we didn't know it was going to be 2 weeks, we thought it could be actually much longer. And I had to go into it knowing that I wasn't sure how long I would be their teacher for. And we started with connection to self, and then we shifted to group, and then to the land, and then kind of meshed all three of those together. And these were some of the resources we used to help kids connect to the land without knowing what their access to those natural spaces were. And I suggested to Rosa, I said, what if I do the webinar and I take the group down to the pond where I took the students every day? That would be pretty cool. And during the webinar, I'll just talk to everybody down at the pond. And she brought up a really great point and said, it might be dark, Tanya, and nobody could see you. So I took a little video at lunchtime today to give you a little window into what that looked like to bring students down to the space. So we're going to show that for a second, and then I'll share with you a couple of tools that we used.
Hi everybody, Tanya here. I was going to take you live this evening for our webinar, but as Rosa pointed out, she was a bit worried about what the lighting would be like. So I thought rather than do that, I would take you for a little lunch hour live walk and show this video to you this evening. I'm down at a green space just down at the end of my street. Super grateful to have this space. And this is where we began many of our days with 32 groups of 30 grade 4 students in the elementary virtual school. One of the things that we would do as soon as we arrived here was greet the land, share some gratitudes. We would use this space to lift questions, to connect to the grade 4 curriculum in a just really authentic way. We used this place to unpack a lot of our work around Orange Shirt Day, which was not just on the day, but many days leading up to and after that day. And we also greeted a tree every morning. So I'm going to show you our tree that we greeted just in one. So I mentioned a special tree. Here she be. This is the one we came to say hello to and explore each and every morning, and see how it was changing. As you can see, it's lost many of its leaves. There was also lots of signage you can see in the background that we explored. Students were really interested in sitting here. We would do some read alouds under the trees. They were super interested in plants. And we began to use the Seek app to help identify some of the plants in and around this space in hopes that that might transfer to their own explorations and observations in their neighborhoods. One of the things that we started over the 2 weeks was a field guide, and students could create a paper field guide, they could create a digital field guide, and I'll show you in the slide deck an example of what a student came up with in terms of many of the questions that they had when they were exploring their nearby nature. Hope you've enjoyed our little virtual walk. I wish I could show you more. Down the way is our beautiful climbing tree that I shared with the students as a really special memory place for me, and then that sparked them to create their own memory map. See you soon.
Awesome, thanks. So some of the things that I learned from taking the students outside, and that not every time that I went outside was I there for a long period of time. It was sometimes only 20 minutes. And I found that that 20 minutes just laid the groundwork for so many beautiful inquiries, questions, conversations, observations. And one of those was this gratitude activity. And so after reading the book, Giving Thanks, we had come back inside. So I transitioned from my phone to my computer, and just some of the beautiful responses I got from students, I really don't think I would have got those kinds of responses had we not had that experience on the land prior to that. It ended up being one of the students' favorite feedbacks from the 2 weeks, but definitely I think it allowed for our English as a second language learners to express themselves in maybe pictures, words, feelings. I just felt like it gave space for a lot of different types of learners. And then in the video, you noticed in the next slide, I mentioned the Every Child Matters and Orange Shirt Day. And I think also experiencing being on the land every day gave just it life. It wasn't just the one day, it was really the week of uncovering what it means to be a child who matters, what residential school was. We had some really powerful conversations leading up to the day, and which I felt like on the day of Orange Shirt Day, where we tuned into the virtual broadcast as a class, I found that the conversations were so much braver and richer. They were really emotional as well. We had 2 students who had grandmothers who were in residential school, and they shared very openly and about how it made them feel and how it affected them and their families. And because it was a pretty heavy morning, we took the afternoon to be on the land, and we walked on the trails for an hour and sort of tried to unpack and process what we were learning. And it was a really lovely way to model to them as an adult too. When I deal with big emotions and things are really tough, I do go outside and I do go for walks in nature. And that certainly helps me to process those things. I think it helped them realize that when we know better, we do better as humans, and that the land can help us hold a lot of the heaviness, and can remind us of, the amazing resilience that exists in Indigenous communities, but also in nature. And the book here, The Lost Words, I don't know if anybody knows the background of that book, but the connection to that was just this idea of when we were able to talk and unpack at the grade 4 level about language loss from residential schools, we were able to transfer that when it comes to natural spaces and the loss of our connection to natural spaces and the words that come up for us. So this book is about 22 words that were taken out of the Junior Webster's Dictionary that were nature-based words. And it just reinforced that we take care of and protect and know and understand deeply the places that we have a relationship with. So I thought that was pretty powerful. For the next slide, if you want to move to that one, Rosa, this is just a quick little example of the sparks that showed up for us. So you saw in the video, there was the maple tree we visited. There was an instance where magic that a chickadee just happened to fly right into the screen. And it was a beautiful moment of just the spontaneity of taking kids outside, where you just never know what's going to happen. And we were silently creeping up to see if we could get closer to this little bird, and then it came right at us, and the kids just, the inquiries exploded after that about birds and plants and how they interact with each other, was really lovely. So we had a document that we would use when we came back in, kind of the start of a knowledge building circle, where we would have our quest for questions, and then people would start sharing those. So that was neat. The next slide gives you an example. I think I mentioned that I'd show you something from a student's field guide. So they created either a paper field guide or a digital field guide. And this was a student's, kind of individual wonder about snails and all the research she did. And this was just in 2 weeks. They absolutely loved their field guide work, I think. The next slide refers back to this idea of well-being. And I think I really wanted to spend some time to talk about this, because I think, as I said, I will be a better educator, and I will be in better, more like a better position to be of service to our system, having understood. I knew that well-being was important, but now I think I know it on a very different level. And I think we really need to right now take care of ourselves and take care of each other and take care of the land. And giving an opportunity for students to understand that in the virtual classroom that they need this balance, that they can't be on screens all day, that they need to somehow move their body and they need to do something kind for their mind and their heart and then someone else or the land, was a really nice framework to use. And so we used the tool Jamboard here and had a room for each component of well-being, and it was really nice to see all of the things show up that they were doing to take care of each other. The next slide talks a little bit about York Region District School Board a bit more, because now that we're back in our role, I think this even more so comes to life, that we are given this opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And I think our team is really, really committed right now to acknowledging the benefits, the physical and emotional benefits of access to safe outdoor spaces, and how we might even the playing fields for some of our students. We believe in modeling teaching about environmental issues, solutions, and stewardship through an equity integrated approach that really promotes collaboration, problem solving, and experiential learning. We're really trying to build partnerships that are authentic and long-term, natural curiosity being one of those. We believe in sustainability and think 7 generations into the future. We believe in sharing power and elevating all voices, especially students, but also especially nature voices. So what is the role of the wild? What is the role of the land in terms of a voice? And how can that voice be a teacher? We believe in to-do lists versus to-be lists versus to-do lists. You've probably heard me say that before. And we just believe in respectful relationships. So the final slide I wanted to tell you about is based on an experience at the beginning of this year. We know that outdoor learning was exploding, and I think it was really tricky for us as a team that knew that the outdoor spaces were going to be a really key strategy for students, for educators, for families. And the mandate at the beginning of the year was that we couldn't go off school property. And part of me, if you know me, I do advocate hard for things, but when I advocate really hard, it's because I really don't accept no for an answer. And there was a whole group of us that really didn't accept no. And even though it was probably impossible to shift a large school board in changing quite a solid stance on community walks, we were successful in writing to superintendents and writing to kind of decision makers and giving them context as to why we thought that this was really important that we open up these spaces, and that we were part of the solution. So we created a protocol that hopefully gave a framework of how to do this in a good way, and shared that out, and lo and behold, the decision was turned around. So that was really successful, and the result of lots of hard work and advocacy from many key people that believe in outdoor learning. So just really proud of that. And I know I have to wrap up, so I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and that's just how can we see the land as more than maybe we see it now. And I think this is such a lovely, lovely quote, to see it as self. And I think that was at the end of that quote, that was the core thing that I wanted to do with these students in the virtual learning, was to see them connected to that land. And even if it was through my connection to the land and my memories and my excitement and my passion, I was hoping that at least that might transfer to them. So if I was modeling a sit spot and they were part of choosing what a good sit spot is and why I would do a sit spot, they might be encouraged to do the same in their spaces. And I think that is what we need to do right now. And our kids are under a lot of stress. Our families are a lot of stress. Our educators are under a lot of stress. And I'm going to be honest, I went outside for students, but I also went outside for me. It was a part of my well-being to bring students outside. Really helped me get through the day as well. And in turn, I was a better educator for them. So thanks for the time. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the discussion afterwards. And I'm kind of trying to read the chat. It sounds like people would like a copy of the YRDSB community box protocols. I think that's okay. I can share that with the team, and really looking forward to looking at all those comments closely after Natasha is able to speak.
Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for really showing what is possible. I think I've definitely been thinking about the online learning and thinking about how this is possible and how educators are able to do it. And I really think and hope that what you shared is going to be inspiring for the educators and the people that have joined us. And also, you know, connecting to the message from last webinar about well-being and about slowing down and about connecting to the land. So I really appreciated those connections and those reminders. So thank you again. And now I would like to pass it along to Natasha. Thanks for joining us.
Ani, bonjour, Natasha Indigenous, Nishnabé Métis and Dao, Wawash Kashin Dodam, La Rivière Rouge, Kiligan Zibi and Dunjaba, Sutton and Dinda. So I am Nishnabé Métis Kwe, Deer Clan. My family comes from both Red River and Kiligan Zibi, so near Maniwaki. And I'm currently on the Williams Treaty. That means that I have an ongoing relationship with Georgina Island through work, but also through relationships. I'm thankful that I was invited, and perhaps on a less serious note, I wanted to start out with this meme because I love it and it's my favorite so far. I haven't found one to replace it yet. There's so much craziness in the world that sometimes, you know, it feels like a massive fire might not put out all the smudging requirements. I really, what I've learned from Haley, she shared something that I taught her. I'm also going to share, she shared an article about bravery and the need to muddle through things. And even if the words don't come out right, to just say them. So I am going to be completely transparent and say that I've been on the computer the entire day. I've tried to go outside. It is the end of the day. So some of the words may not come out right, but I am speaking from the heart, and I hope that that is translated. Can you click to the next slide, please? So second warning, I also have children and a full house. So if you hear a squeaky door, that's exactly what it is. This is to show you not only the Williams Treaty, but where I am in relation to them. So I'm joining you from Sutton, which is near Georgina Island. And so part of this conversation had started around land acknowledgements. The unfortunate thing being is that's sometimes where it stays. And that would be my hope, that with natural curiosity, we're able to move past the land acknowledgement. So being a territory acknowledgement, the treaty, and the ongoing relationships that we have, but using that to unpack the land. And so I'm hoping that the next couple of slides will bring you to different ways of seeing that. So in listening to Tanya speak, it also reminded me that I think we've come around to the point where we can say, you know, there's no such thing as bad weather, just not appropriate clothing. And so some of these things come into our practice over time. And so this is more about practice than it is real application in terms of a specific grade requirement. So it's my hope that our understanding of our responsibility to unpack what the wilderness means and how that comes up in our language and how we interact with nature actually shifts student and family thinking around that. this quote on the left-hand side, what the hands experience, the heart feels, and what the heart feels, the mind remembers, was always one of my favorite quotes, because it just reminded me of the wholeness of everybody. To be able to teach means that you are actually teaching the whole person. And when done, I think the way that you intended, it translates to relationship, it translates to new connections, much like the ripples in the water. You can see the effects of it come into play. The almost ironic thing now is that in Teachers College, we're taught about how people learn, and it's from the physical to the image to the symbolic. And so like this quote, it feels very much like we have to put things back in a very intentional way. What I mean by that is that we often start with the mind or an image and the things that we post online. I'm wondering about how much work we put into finding out what those hands have experienced and what those hearts have felt before we inundate the mind to make that truly accessible. Another quote that fits with this, I found it on social media, but the land reminds you of who you are when you forget. And so while this is from an Indigenous standpoint, I think that's true of everybody. I think that's true of our refugee students. I think it's true of third generation students. I think it's true of our students, of our Black students. I think that's true of everybody. Our experiences of the land and the connections that we make there remind us exactly of who we are. And I think what better message to move forward with. If you can move to the next slide, please. So the reason I showed you that was to introduce the idea of Visca buying. And that's been put forward by Leanne Simpson and so many other academics and Anishinaabe people as a whole. It's the idea of pulling everything from history forward and connecting to the present. And so what you heard in the introduction from Haley was survivance, a word that I've used. It's come out in research, but it doesn't stay in the theoretical realm because we live it every day. And that's by actively going and seeking out and pulling it into the present moment. So the reason I have this map here is a reminder of exactly how many Indigenous peoples there are around the world. And knowing that we teach in urban settings, how many of those people end up in our classrooms, whether that is virtually or in person, and to be mindful of that. If you can click forward, next slide, please. So there was a session that I was able to join in on with Joanna Sam from UBC. I always credit where I've learned something from. I'm not going to share her story. It's not mine to tell. But the one message that I got was this play between online and on land, and the idea that everything needs to be online, and how on the land can be treated as technology as well. And we saw this with the implementation of new curriculum and an emphasis on modern learning as well. And that doesn't mean that it's all tech all the time. I'm hoping that we can use technology in order to pull forward the fantastic stories and the experiences that we can share, so that we really do intentionally build in relationship and community understanding. And I'll show more examples of this a little bit later on. But it's this importance of knowledge creation and sharing that makes us feel alive, makes us feel a connection to humanity. And that's what's so desperately needed right now. Next slide, please. So this is from Lynn Gale, as you can see on the bottom of the picture. And the reason I added it in is because so often, like I just said, when we think about modern learning or technology or Virtual learning, it's this usually from a Western standpoint or Eurocentric standpoint on, physical reality. And there's all of this unharnessed knowledge. There's all of these things that don't get validated on a daily basis for students. And it's often what they go away with, that gut feeling in their stomach or that connection that they missed. So to bring in time with the land, to have sit spots, to invite them to share what they've learned from their family, and to show value in that, to talk about their dreams and their stories. Those are all ways that we can not only get to know the whole person that we're interacting with, but get them to see value in themselves. You can skip to the next slide, please. Thank you. It is my hope, I guess selfishly, that we start to learn how to move from learning on the land to learning from the land. And it's not that one is wrong and one is right. It simply means, for me, learning on the land is initially, if you take something and you try to apply it exactly the way you did it outdoors. Tanya can add to this and correct me if I'm wrong afterwards. I feel like teachers do the exact same thing when they enter virtual spaces. We take whatever we know, whatever our strong suits are in the classroom, and we try to apply them online. And soon enough, we're reminded that that doesn't work and it doesn't translate completely. Learning from the land means you're actually embracing the space that you're in, that you are learning from Mother Earth, that you are taking that moment in time, and you're taking what's needed, which is another teaching, that you're taking what is available to you at that moment in time. No student will ever learn, no matter how many math classes that you do, the exact same lesson at the exact same moment in time. And it's crazy for us to expect the exact same thing if we go into an outdoor space. And so there are some words that come to mind, especially when I think about this slide. And this was a monarch butterfly in my front yard. And so the exact same space throughout the year changes throughout the seasons. There's a ditch, and with that, there's the thistle and the milkweed and all of those things that come up, and we see the beautiful monarchs in August. Come September and October, we have white and purple asters blooming there, and those come for the last sweet treat for the deer before winter comes. So there's a reason for the cycles. There's a reason for what's there and what unveils itself to you when you're in a particular space at a moment in time. So embrace the fluidity, take in the cycles, know that you're addressing all the senses. So while you might have planned for a lesson and you might have planned for a specific outcome, know that all of your senses are at play. And that's exactly where we should take it. We're talking about natural curiosity, and that's what it should stay, curiosity, and following the lead of the child and being responsive to that. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. Next slide. So here's what I actually did. This is the river behind my house. And I started there. We went out for a sit spot. I literally walked out, and students who were otherwise possibly upside down in their chairs or in their rooms for hours on end, all of a sudden lit up and made connections. And so whether it was a comfortable and calm space in the house or outside, they could see something through my eyes. And so that shared experience also brought in other reasons for conversation later on. It wasn't forced, it was authentic. That's also why these resources are here. So I'm not selling these books by any means, but they're a part of my toolkit because I've been able to apply them, and going back to the same book and learning how to use it in different ways is a part of my practice. The reason Notebook Know-How is here is because it very much fits with my idea of what teaching children is, and that's seeing them as capable. I see them as capable writers. I see them as capable readers. That includes being outdoors. It means that they're able to have agency over the reason that they're writing and what speaks to their hearts. The second one here is messy math. And the first week that I was in the classroom, it was all about math in the world around me. And so for students who sit and do their lessons and do all kinds of tutoring programs and are inundated with calculations, for them to be able to see math just by looking outside gives them another lens. The second week was math about me, and it wasn't, there's this superficial level. I know that my house number is 238, and I know that my sports jerseys is 31. But it's not until a number has meaning to someone that they actually start to understand its value. And lastly, we have How to Be an Explorer of the World. And so the reason I love this book is because I've used it to ground conversations for an entire year. There's no prescriptive way to use it. And it really does get you to look at the world and be a detective. And it very much fits into all of those things that we talk about, and embracing curiosity with children outdoors and getting them to use different senses and focusing in on something on a large scale or small scale, and all of those pieces. So if you can click to the next slide. So here you have my children on the trampoline. The reason I took this is because I saw them doing this without even, I didn't plan it, I didn't say anything, I just saw them doing it. So I took a picture. They have a magnifying glass and they're playing I Spy, what they see in the trees. We've been on this trampoline, you can see it's well loved. We've been on this trampoline so many times, but the activity has never been the same. Sometimes we lie on our stomachs and we look under the trampoline to see what we see crawling around on the ground. Other times we're interacting with the animals and bouncing on and off of it. Other times we lie on our backs and we look at the clouds. And so the photo is really here for me as a reminder to talk about, no matter how many times you go back to the same place, you will learn something different. And so it can be the scale, the location, the perspective, the season, who's present. It's ever changing, but it'll always give you exactly what you needed at a moment in time. That's my belief anyways. So Shkaga Mikwe, Mother Earth, there's so many ways to see things with fresh eyes. I hope that more opportunities are created so that children can see what is unfolding for them. Next slide, please. So I did the opposite of what Tanya did. We started the day outside. Luckily, it wasn't raining in the morning. And I had to unpack what being Indigenous meant, which is kind of heavy for grade 3, considering they've never had the conversation before, which is what many teachers find themselves with. So I wasn't going to make Orange Shirt Day their first experience with it. So we spent the morning, I don't know if you know the activity of exploding a backpack, but I exploded a bundle. I didn't take out all items, but I took out specific items and talked about them. So the significance of a blanket and a bundle, connecting that to temple and synagogue and all kinds of other pieces. The importance of animals and our connection to not only clothing, but things that we see as functional and also spiritual. And we talked about the calendar on the turtle's back and the importance of everything that the earth gives us and sustainability. So with that in mind and appreciation for everything that's around us and knowing how to respect that, students started to share and ask questions, and then we listened to the Orange Shirt Day story, and I left them with a reflection. We didn't talk about it. We didn't do all those things because I wanted to be mindful of how much I was putting on them in one day. And so we kept up the conversation afterwards. After the reflection, they got to scroll through everyone else's slides and their ideas and their pictures and ask questions. And there was also parents listening in the background. So that's the beauty of virtual learning. I think that doesn't come up often enough. We try to shut parents out. I'm not saying we in this call, I'm saying the big we in terms of teaching community. We say that, you know, parents can't add comments to Google Classroom, or parents can't sit in on the class. I embrace that. I really do, because it's by teaching and having more members of the family in the room that we have a common language, that we have common stories. And that's what I hope to see more of. You can click ahead. So I feel that it's my job to create space for connection and unlearning. That's it. I only got to see them for 2 weeks. As much as I was connected to them, and I did look forward to, you know, holding on a little bit longer, because I didn't quite believe that it would only be 2 weeks when I was told. Things kind of never work out the way they're supposed to in education, so I kind of went with it. But I think that that's a good message to have. Think about the value, or the one thing that you hope that your students take away from you. And it's not a lesson, it's not a specific curriculum expectation, it's a value. It might be responsibility, it might be respect, it might be listening to another perspective. If they take away that one thing that you wanted, then I feel that we're lucky, because it's prepared them and set them up to continue to have broader conversations. The side photos, the left and right, were taken with the Indigenous education team from York Region. We couldn't stay away from each other. We did want to go learn on the land, so that's exactly what we did. We learned from Joe from Tanya for the day, and I was really blessed to be able to learn to identify specific plants and hear stories. The thing is, there's so many there's so many books out there now, which is fantastic. I am the biggest bookworm you'll probably ever meet, but it doesn't mean it's mine. And so I have ideas and I have concepts and knowledges of certain things, but it doesn't mean that I own it. It's, for example, the wild grapes on the right-hand side. I wouldn't have trusted myself to go pick berries in the forest before meeting Joe, because A, I didn't want to be sick. B, I didn't have this concept of skeleton berries. C, it wasn't mine yet. And so I feel like in a world where we rush to have everything, in a world where we have such a concept of ownership and that's mine and I can do it, and empowerment, that we really do need to slow down. And it's not a bad thing. It just means that we need to go back to that person and continue to build that relationship, or go back to that tree and continue to learn from it before we truly understand everything that we're supposed to know. So now when I go for walks with my kids, I love that no one in my neighborhood knows what wild grapes are, because I get to pick them all. So I'm happy about that. But we need to continue to create value in what families are able to bring into the teaching. So it might not be an elder that you're connected to. It might be the families in their kitchens when we're tuning in virtually. And that can grow very amazing things. Sorry, I'm going over my notes. I think the most important thing, like I said in the beginning, was seeing everyone as capable. They are giving us their best. They are doing their best. And that in itself is very Anishinaabe. to know that people are capable, and to start with that standpoint changes the language, changes the tone, and changes the way that we set experiences up for each other. So I think giving children a chance to see that the learning happens beyond the four walls of the classroom, beyond the before and after school bell, all of the stress, all of this planning, all of this ridiculousness that is virtual learning right now. I think that it is an opportunity, and that's not to be, cheery and hokey pokey at the very end. It's very much, this is the generation, and these are the children who are going to be able to take this with them as they move forward and become citizens and have a better understanding of well-being, and think of all the things that they have survived. How have you helped to shape their sense of place, the tools that they carry with them, to be the leaders that we need? No pressure. Next slide. So lastly, how do you know that you've arrived? How do you know that you've done what you set out to do? How do you know that, that one value that you really wanted everyone to take on, that it happened? When you start getting random photos of people's feet, when you start getting photos of people's experiences and where they've been, when they start to share about what they did on the weekend, when someone wants to come in and share something, that's when you know that you did it. And you've just created ripples in the water. So in the middle of all this chaos, I hope that you can find a way to be the stillness. Miigwech.
There I am. I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. Miigwech. That was beautiful. For those of you who haven't met me already, I'm Brenda. I'm part of the Natural Curiosity team. And I want to try to get a conversation going a little bit between you, Natasha, and Tanya. And there were two things that really emerged for me from your presentations. And one was how that sense of place that you brought to your virtual teaching, how do you feel it translated with your students? Because I feel like it did, and I just want to hear more about how you knew it was happening with your students.
I can just build on what Natasha just said, and it reminded me, Natasha, I'd forgotten this beautiful moment of when a student wanted to take us in her backyard to show us her grandmother's garden, and took us on a 10-minute tour of this beautiful space. And then we were able to say hello to her grandmother and share our appreciation of like the bounty that she was creating in the backyard. I think it was moments like that where you know that you are building that community. And I wrote in the chat how I really felt privileged to be invited as a guest into people's homes. And when you had moments like that where a parent was actually sharing and emailing that they had been listening in to a lot of the lessons because they had enjoyed them and were coming on the nature walks. And I even had a parent during Orange Shirt Day who was that child who had a grandparent in residential school. She reached over and chatted and identified herself that this is so-and-so's mom. And I just like to thank you for not making this just about one day, but carrying on this conversation throughout the week, and for addressing this in the way that you have. And I think that's when you know that you're really having an impact, when it's that multi-generational connection to learning that is important to people and their places and their selves, their spirit, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Natasha?
So it's that understanding of that place, right? If it becomes a reference point in conversation, you know that that experience was meaningful. You get the emails from parents, and you get people chiming in and asking questions when something's happening. You also get to feel connected to something greater. You know, when there's a pause and it's out of engagement, not out of, no one's there, no one's turning their screen on. You know the feeling. You can feel it in that moment.
Mm-hmm. You were also mentioning that you felt like students were able to connect more deeply with their family and their family's relationship to nature, that there was that silver lining to the virtual learning environment.
Yeah, I think virtual learning is really, really difficult. You don't know if someone is truly engaged, but I think that when you hear the feedback that students are coming the next day with things in hand to show you and telling you that they went on a family walk the night before, and that they were, when you are lifting kind of what are you doing for your well-being, and they're lifting things like, and I understand this is also wrapped up in some privilege as well, because some of our students just don't have access to those spaces. But it might be that they're trying to do a sit spot and trying to find the quietest space that they can find. And it might be by a window, looking at a tree, observing a tree, and some students might have a backyard or a balcony or a natural trail near their house. Yeah.
So I think that we all need reminders sometimes, right? Sometimes even I'll be talking about something and I'll pause, and then I'll take my computer outside and continue the conversation. But sometimes we need that extra push or the reminder. And I think that we forget exactly how powerful students are, how powerful children are. So often there's people that don't want to do something, but because their child said it, they'll do it. So I think while it's beneficial for everyone, it's the children that can change someone's mind if they don't want to or are less willing to. And I think it goes back to a little bit what I was saying about unpacking this idea of wilderness and exactly what is the risk, what's the danger, why are you avoiding something? That's not to negate the privilege that Tanya was talking about. If you do have access to something, why is it that you aren't going? And to be aware of that and our own biases or assumptions around what is truly dangerous, why aren't we going outside, if it is there, why are we not using it? It's free for everybody. It is a part, it's there for everyone. So while we might not be able to go into a crowded space, we can find a spot, especially in a country like ours.
I found we attended a webinar, one of Joe Pitawonkwit's videos this summer, his webinars, and he's amazing. I can't recommend him enough to all of our listeners to take advantage of his webinars, because he's so lively and so connected to the plants. But one of the things I learned from him this summer was the importance of learning the names, because it seems like learning the name is part of what makes the plant, in your words, Natasha, your own. It's how you come to, in a way, make that heart connection. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that process is for you, about making something your own, because it's something we can help our students do.
So I'm going to go back just a little bit and explain that another thing that has come out of teaching virtually has been the creation of spaces where self-identified students can actually access teachings and have it not mess up their schedule during the school day and all of those pieces. Secondly, families can also listen in and have access to those learning, so it's not just for the students. And so he is Joe Bedanquet is just one of the people that we've brought in. There were multiple knowledge keepers from various nations that were brought in regularly to provide teachings, so that we could continue to grow and learn, but also unpack certain things, and then also go based off of student experiences. But he was definitely one of the favorites, because everyone wanted to continue learning about what they had access to. And it's that, I don't remember what the scientific word for it is, but once you recognize something, you see it everywhere. And so new car phenomenon, whatever the scientific word is for it, it's the same thing happens in nature. You know, someone has taught you about something, all of a sudden you notice it everywhere. And so to be able to translate that to students is amazing. But there's many layers to that. I think language is powerful. I think that specifically learning the word within Anishinaabe-Moan, or if you're learning from someone else within the Indigenous language, it unpacks another way of seeing it. That's memorable. There's something to be said about learning, you know, how many kids dread learning about the water cycle, and then you go and teach them the water cycle on a medicine wheel, and they go, oh, that makes sense. There's so much less struggle because it's in that story, it's in that experience, and they remember it, and it becomes a part of how they see it later on. And so the same is true for plant recognition. My hesitation is that I know the word and I know what the plant looks like, but I haven't gone and experienced it and heard it from somebody else, so it's not mine yet. And so that's just me. But there are so many books out there, and for me, I started learning about mound gardening last year, and so it took me a couple of weekends, and I started to develop mound garden. I didn't plant anything. I let the nature take it over, and so I've prepped it and prepared it so that hopefully I can start planting next year. But I pace myself on purpose. It's with that intention, or in looking forward to, it's that gift. And so often we think that gift is something that is given to us as an object, but it's that piece of knowledge and that story and understanding that word and being able to say it, and to be able to have someone else show you what that plant actually looks like, and the other plants that are next to it, because usually plants are in pairs. The one that, you know, for lack of a better word, the evil twin, the one that looks exactly like it but is not so beneficial to you. So to be able to take in all of those pieces, then you know that plant. So
I can add just the connection to something I learned from an experiential learning facilitator, Jen Stanchfield, and she introduced this idea of, you know, when you first meet a group, and it's often our go-to that we do name games, and we go around and say, introduce yourself and where you're from, and everyone goes around the circle and says their name, and nobody remembers anybody's name because they're concerned about what they're going to say and when their turn is. And she unpacked for us the intentionality of that is not, it's not serving the purpose of getting to know people and being in relation to them. So you need to ease into that idea of people's names are really important to them, and they are part of their identity, and it's really important to get their name, pronounce their name right, and understand their name and know what they would like to be called. And there's that deep kind of connection to a name and language that I think with plant knowledge is sort of the same thing. And with kids, I think one of a misconception, or maybe is that's still out there with outdoor education, is that, you know, outdoor educators walk down the trail and name, that's a this and that's a this and that's a this kind of tree, or do you know what kind of tree this is? And let me tell you, because I have it all in my head and I'm going to kind of vomit all that information out to you. And I think that this way of bringing about a curious form of learning the name and leaning into the name and learning into the name is the same as that facilitation strategy of having more intimate conversations with people and asking them to talk about things first, and then see what it looks like to actually introduce people at the end of the day, and see how much more in tune they are to listen to someone's name and to remember them because they have that relation with them. And I think that with plants, Joe is magic, and I felt very privileged to listen in on some of those learnings. And I think he is magic with names, and I am not gifted with that memory. But I remember stories. If you tell me a story and connect that to a plant or a tree, I will remember it forever. And so I think, yeah, it reminds me of Anne Palo and talking about names. And I just think that it's how we go about leaning and learning into the name. And sometimes if we go about it where you must create a field guide, and that field guide will have all of those itemize your wonderings, versus the curiosity is first, the questions are first. What might you name that tree or that plant first based on what you're observing? It just builds that relationship first. And I think that's what Natasha's saying. Like, it's only then that it becomes part of you and you know that plant deeply and can maybe pass on that knowledge, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what it made me think of.
Yeah. I'm going to open it up to questions from our listeners. Asha, do you want to read some questions from the chat?
So I think we've all been so enthralled, actually. I don't know that I've seen any questions, but we would like to ask people to put in any thoughts that they've been having, any questions, even half-formed musings that this wonderful discussion has brought forward. You can put them in the chat.
Asha, I did notice a question like really early on that I didn't really like, I didn't speak to, and that's when I took kids on a virtual walk. I did use that is a privilege in and of itself. I used the data on my phone to take them on a walk, and then I transferred back into my home to my computer. But I also took them in my backyard. And I also, someone suggested in the chat where you could capture some things maybe offline and then share them, kind of like what I did with the video today. But for sure, that is absolutely a privilege that I am really grateful that I was able to do that, and that live kind of in the moment curiosity of being able to be spontaneous and not know what was going to happen on the trail, and be able to say hi to neighbors and show how you might be safe outside was beautiful. But there are other ways that probably you could connect kids to natural spaces, and even the sidewalk cracks have beautiful learnings and teachings in them. So just finding the space that you have access to and inviting kids in, your passion will come through no matter what platform you're using, I think, would be my suggestion there.
I would also say that I've been outside and it started raining. So I think I've also had multiple tabs open and switched back and forth between my phone, and they couldn't hear me, but things happen, and to be okay with that. It's never going to look completely polished the way that you intended. I think that in what Tanya said also is to be mindful of, there will always be barriers, there will always be things that should be negotiated and that we should have access to, and all of those pieces. But I think it's a balance, a personal choice, if you will, of finding and knowing what people need and what they should have. And so, are you being mindful of that?
Mm-hmm. There's one question here from Kim, who's looking for a recommendation of items she could put in a backpack as a white settler on a walk, doing a backpack unpack lesson.
I would ask the kids. I would ask them. Like, that's such a great opportunity for them to brainstorm. Like, okay, if we're going to go on a nature walk tomorrow, what do you think that I should be putting in my backpack? You come up with your brainstorm of what you think should go in there. How would we look after ourselves? How would you look after a group if there was a group going together outside? And depending on the age, man, it would be lovely to see what they would come up with, right? And how that builds in resiliency and risk management at a very young age of what they need to do and they don't need much, but what might they want to bring with them, and what knowledge do they want to bring with them more than anything to navigate the world. Would be really interesting to see it from their perspective, I think. Was that a non-answer? Kind of a tarp, a sit spot, like all that kind of stuff, but mine was a bit of a non-answer, sorry.
Yeah, No, I completely agree. I think that the items, and depending on what the kids want to do, that's what you should follow. I also think that there's certain things that you can take with you depending on what you know you want to get at. So as much as we say that, completely open to everything that will be explored, as a professional, it's your job to know the curriculum, right? So to know what connections you can make, to know that there's a couple of things that you could have with you to embrace that. So to have, encourage them to have a small notebook and a pencil with them, or any of those items that will enrich their experience when they do go out. Or if you have a piece of rope so that you can circle an area so people can go through different stations. I mean, those things just come based on the location that you're going to and the type of things that you want to set up.
Something I will share that I used a lot is the app Seek, and it was really engaging for kids. So I was able to flip my screen and show them in live time using the app Seek, which is thousands of, identified plants and animals in and around the area. And for those that they were already curious about and were wondering about, we could actually identify it on the spot, which was pretty neat. And then I found that transferred back to their homes, where if they did have technology, they could add that app that's free and it doesn't require a login, that they could do the challenges on Seek and find a few new plants that they didn't know about, or animals that were in their areas. So it's pretty cool. It's a new app that came out last year.
I will also say, depending on the grade, so I'm already looking ahead at another question for older students, but if they have technology on them, I think the Notes app is fantastic because they can record and they can take pictures and they can take notes, and they start to, you get to see the world through their eyes. And I think that's so important. Is it okay if I read out the question that was there, or I'll just continue speaking to it? The question was about taking older grades outside. What about engagement for grades 8, 9, all the way to 11? So I would say that the older someone is, the more that they need to be outdoors. I think that we really want to pack in as much as we can for early years and primary students, and then there's a lot of excuses that come in the way as children get older. And I think, their eyes light up when they hear a story. They still love the same things. They just need to be reminded of it. And that reminder or that push from a teacher on the other side of the computer might be just what they need to re-spark something that was previously there. Tanya, I don't know if you want to continue.
I'm trying to find a text that I got from an educator last year who I worked with, and she didn't take her kids outside. And this year, she's like, that's it, I'm doing it. And she's a grade 8 teacher. And she wrote me not too long ago saying how beautiful it has been to take her students outside and how much they have loved it and how much they ask for it. And I was going to try and find her words. So shout out to Amanda if you're listening out there. Good job, girl. She's taking her grade 8s out regularly and absolutely loving it. And so I can't find it. But anyways, I totally agree with Natasha. And I think those who take older students out, it's a different way of going out with them maybe, but not really. I think letting them lead and letting their curiosities lead will give you the right way to do it, because they're the ones that are lifting what they want to lift, and you got to be able to go with it. And you might not know the answers to their questions, and you might not know the direction they're going to take, and you need to be okay with kind of just giving up that power and control of knowing where it's going to go. Because secondary students, my goodness, you bring them outside, they're going to solve the world's problems and you'll be left in the dust. But if you can help facilitate that and be a really lovely guide on the side to capture all their beautiful ideas, and then maybe give them a platform in which to share those ideas and have some agency around them, I think that is a super powerful position to be in as an educator, if you can just amplify the learning for them.
I think something that I'll add to that is by a certain age, students will hold you accountable. I say that with all the love in my heart. Be careful in terms of how much you put out there, and being okay with what they're going to challenge you with, or what they're going to come up with and then expect you to follow up on, especially in terms of conversations with principals or other pieces. They will hold you accountable, and that will be the biggest lesson to them in terms of, do they truly have agency? Will someone truly respect the relationships that they've created? And so I think that's a fabulous thing, but also just a word of caution.
Okay, so we do have about 5 minutes left, and there's still lovely comments and questions being shared. But I would like to honor the time that our presenters have given and everyone who's attending have shared with us, and move on to just a bit of a exercise we've heard lots of great questions from you, and so we also have some questions for you. And so those of you who were here last time, you have done this with us before. And so we invite you to share a feedback in the form of a square, a circle, and a triangle. And if you don't want your response to this to be public, then you can to any of the NC members, and only the team will receive it, and we'll share it with Natasha and Tanya as well. And so we want to hear from you. One thing that really resonated with you, something that you're still circling around or wondering about, and the triangle to represent something that you might change in your practice following this workshop. And so please feel free to take the next 4 minutes that you have to do this. And that would be really greatly appreciated. And I know that these are big questions because Tanya and Natasha have given us so much. And yeah, I can't express my gratitude for everything. Brenda, I think you said, the gifts that they've extracted from this time and from this incredible challenge that they've had to rise to meet. And I know that many of you are also dealing with. So thank you. I feel so inspired. And I will just give a couple minutes for that, and also at the same time launch a bit of a poll. And for those of you who are in a rush, maybe this is something that you can complete in the next few minutes. And so we'll give you time to do that. And if there are any questions, Tanya and Natasha, I know you've been good about checking in the chat that you want to speak to while folks are voting in the poll and also doing the square, circle, triangle exercise. Feel free to just continue for the last few minutes, and hopefully we can go a few minutes over because we've had such a rich conversation. We really didn't want to cut it off. So thank you.
I can share. Jen Lemus asked about land acknowledgements, and I responded a little bit there, but I should also add on to that our secondary students last year wrote a beautiful land acknowledgement as part of a school-wide multi-course, multi-department inquiry around birds, and it was for Earth Day, in preparation for Earth Day. But there was 2 students, as part of their investigation, they co-wrote a land acknowledgement from the voice of a bird. And if I can, Rosa, I think I have got their permission, as long as if you acknowledge that the 2 students that co-wrote that, I have their permission to share that. So if you'd like to see that just as an inspiration for your students, that land acknowledgement, how lovely is that to actually speak through the land about a land acknowledgement, I think was absolutely beautiful. When I heard it, it brought tears to my eyes, and I think everybody else's too. So I'm happy to share that, but that's just one idea. And then I noted to check into the lab school. I know your students co-wrote a land acknowledgement that was brought up in another webinar that was really beautiful.
Okay, so while folks are still completing this little exercise, I will share just a little bit more about next steps. We are going to be providing all of the resources that came up. We've been taking notes on the side. Everything that Natasha and Tanya have mentioned, we will try to honor that and send it out to you in email following this webinar with a recording and all the chat records. And we hope that you can join us for the fourth part, which is going to be coming up in late October or early November. TBD, we'll let you know. And yeah, just another reminder of those resources that are coming to you. And if you have any further questions, I know Danielle has some final announcements and reminders and other resources from Natural Curiosity, but feel free to reach out to us, either myself or Danielle at our emails or through social media. We're always there. So thanks, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So again, I just did want to share a little bit of this update. So Natural Curiosity is excited to be launching our pilot program for the online group coaching sessions with Maria Vimbalis. Some of you may recognize her as she was one of the guest speakers from our second webinar, A COVID Look at the Indigenous Lens. The online professional learning space will be taking place over the course of the next academic year. It is intended for educators who are seeking to deepen their natural curiosity teaching practice in a safe and collegial environment. As you may know, Maria will host 10 two-hour sessions this year on a monthly basis. She brings over 20 years of experience in educational consulting and inquiry-based citizen education with a deep connection to Indigenous perspectives, climate change, and the development of agency in children and youth. Interested participants will be accepted to this pilot program on a first-come, first-served basis, and we're hoping to have the cutoff next Tuesday, October 13th. So if you are interested in taking part, please submit your short application of interest on the Google form, which will be dropped here in the chat box in a moment, as soon as you can. A summary of this opportunity and also the interest form are going to be sent out in the follow-up webinar email along with those resources. And I think I'm going to send this over to Asha to let you know about our exciting new educator Slack.
Yeah, we're very excited about that. So over the past few webinars, we've gotten a lot of feedback asking for a communication platform, a place to share ideas. And so just after our second webinar now, we launched an educator Slack. And so in this third webinar, again, we're asking you if this is something of interest. We have started a Slack, which is a messaging app. You can access either on your phone, on any web browser. The link to join, I believe Alexa is sharing with us in the chat now. And we try and share resources, events, and questions there. We'll be posting some of the resources from this event, and all of the resources from the past events are also available on that platform. We're also on social media, most actively on Twitter, but we do have a Facebook and an Instagram as well. And you can contact any of us via the email, also linked in the chat by Alexa. Thanks, Alexa.
And for more support around virtual teaching and learning, we've also had some lab school educators share about land-based inquiries and how to do them in an online space. So we've already featured those in past newsletters, but we're happy to share them with you again. And if you're also doing, and I know that folks are also doing exemplary work wherever they are, please reach out to me or Danielle about sharing your story. Yeah, we would really love to hear your voices. And finally, Tanya and Natasha, thank you, Chimigwach, so much for sharing your perspectives, for sharing your bravery, and for sharing your time and your energies with us. And Natasha, I'm really resonating with the heart piece and how that informs the mind. And thank you, because it's that I've felt that shift tonight. And I hope to learn with you and from you both again very soon.
Yes, I'd just like to echo that appreciation for everything that you said, but more importantly, the feeling that you brought to how we can still connect with ourselves, with our students, and with the land in these very difficult times. I feel like that sense of connection is something that we all felt this evening. So thank you very much. Miigwech.
Okay, I'm just gonna leave the chat open for those who are still thinking of their responses. Thank you. And tuning in with their faces. Thank you if you have any words that you wanna contribute. I've seen people just unmute themselves and, you know, offer their comments. You're welcome. I know this is a safe space. Tanya and Natasha, if you have any last words for our participants who are still here, yeah, please. And
I would say if you're still circling around something and you'd like to ask a question, feel free. We're still here.
Yeah, and I think the biggest feedback, the most lovely piece of feedback was someone saying they were changing their day plans for tomorrow and they were heading outside. That's really, that's lovely. Just do it. Don't think about it too hard. Just do it. And I saw Chantal. Hi, Chantal. She just, her face popped up for a second and now she's disappeared. Hey. And Julie.
Could you review the sit spot for me?
Yeah. So it's a very, like, if there was one maybe practice for nature connection that's really quite powerful, I would say, is a sit spot. And Natasha could probably share a lot more about, I remember Tawana in our session saying, sit spot, why are you guys calling it a sit spot? She's like, we've been on the land forever and we don't call them sit spots. We just go on the land, right? And she's like, why are you calling them sit spots and magic spots? And so I always have her voice informing me that these names that sometimes we create are, many of them, based in really deeply rooted, beautiful practices from Indigenous communities of being on the land and in relationship to the land. So what I know for sit spots is just that if I'm spending time in different seasons at different times of day, I am building a connection to place. I am noticing and naming things. I'm hearing sounds. I'm hopefully, when I introduce them to students, it's kind of like, what I say is that nature kind of is a bit weary of us humans, and it's not quite normal when we are walking around. It gets a little quiet, but if we sit in a sit spot for long enough, then oftentimes nature gets comfortable with us being there and it will come back alive. So if you can stay long enough on a sit spot where nature can get back to that sort of sense of normalcy, then you are officially welcomed to that space. And usually when you present it like that, the students who wouldn't normally sit still are like, I wonder if nature will invite me, and everyone wants to be included and have a sense of belonging. And I think that the magic of that is it doesn't have to be very long, but some students that I found that once they're introduced, they're hooked and they just want more and more and more time. And they might sketch on their sit spot. They might just sleep on their sit spot. They might watch clouds go by. They might notice birds. But I think it's a gift to have a sit spot, I think. And kids don't have time in their days where everything is silent and nobody's yammering at them and telling them what to do. And I think they notice that it is a gift to have that time to process their thinking. And it's a gift for me too as an adult. So to model that, I'm not walking around checking on kids on their sit spots. I'm in a sit spot as well, modeling what it looks like. And then I'm bringing back all the things that I heard and noticed when we circle up again. Does that help? Natasha, you probably.
So if I were to just go outside, so take my phone essentially, and I am teaching virtually. So if I take my phone and I go over to a green space and I just, bring them with me and we sit for a little bit, what could I do? So maybe have them just sit and listen as well. And then, or if I could do I guess I could do a Google Meet and then have them just record what they are seeing and hearing and take it from there.
Yeah, so jump in, Natasha.
There's a couple of things just to keep in the front of your mind. We do a lot of telling and not showing. So that piece about doing it with your students is truly important. Secondly, don't overthink things. So the whole idea of being able to sit in nature, some of us have started to load, I know the Cornell Lab and other live links that are permanently on YouTube to just sit for 5 minutes and take that breather before you start class, even if they can't go outside. There's all kinds of ways to incorporate it, but it's that whole idea that you're giving your brain a rest, that you are learning to listen to your breathing, that you are actually, I think it was Tanya that told me this original quote, but which space knows you best. So that you've been there often enough that you know the routine of whatever's there, or that you're becoming familiar with the noises. There's all kinds of activities that can be done if you look up sit spots as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing too? In that if you're doing it virtually, what I learned is that engaging the students in choosing your space, right? And talking about what makes a good sit spot. And you're going to have some funny looks by people driving by you, which happened to me because they chose a spot that was right beside the road and I was doing my sit spot. But I think that changing up and then them seeing the difference between, oh, I can hear a lot of human-made noises here versus it's a little bit quieter the deeper I go on the trail. And then one of the first things we did was a sound map. So literally as students at home can just draw a circle, put themselves in the middle, and as you're hearing sounds, right, they can do this in their homes, on their front porch, on a balcony, in the backyard. They're mapping out, do I hear the sound in front of me, to the left, to the right? You could bring in directional sense. You could give them a symbol, or they could create a symbol, a legend as to whether it was a human-made sound or a more than human sound, or whether or not it was a disruptive sound, or if they could even decide whether nature did actually get back to that sense of normalcy and what time that happened for them. There's all kinds of things that you could invite them to do, but I would think, like Natasha said, it's all an invitation. So I often say to people, you know what your body needs right now. You know what your mind, your heart needs. Do that. Let that lead. And if you need just quiet time, take that quiet time. But if you are someone who wants to do something, then you can offer them those choices.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
So I'll add that going beyond the mapping, we think is very real. It's very much right on the surface with what's currently happening at this present moment in time. You can also get the kids, once they have experience, or if you want to push them to see or understand different perspectives, you can ask them about what was here before, what will be here in the future, and sparking that curiosity in terms of place and understanding how things change. Also about building in that observation, right? So you can choose to focus on sound, or you can choose to focus on what you see, and being able to capture that. How many different parts of that 360 degrees can you capture in terms of little doodles in your notebook or things like that. There's all kinds of ways to connect it, as well as from the sky to the earth. So we usually think around us, but it's also thinking about above and below. So what's currently happening below you right now, depending on where you're sitting, what's happening above, and making those connections.
That's
I
great.
love that,
Always
Natasha.
playing with the scale and the perspective will make it applicable to any age.
Wow.
Love it.
And I'm teaching grade 3, so sort of the plants and soil. So, you know, what's below is really.
Yeah.
Mm.
So if you're grade 3, something else to check out is the walking curriculum has some really neat invitations for, like, that reminded me of that, Natasha, where she has an actual walk where what is underneath the ground, right? What is beneath us, I think, is the walk.
Mm.
But she also has umbrella walks or bird's eye view walks or shape walks or like it just, they're just really nice invitations for, and they're developmentally set up in this really short, small little book. And I don't have it right here to show you, but it's Gillian Judson from BC Walking Curriculum.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love that. The sky to the ground. Natasha, I learn something new from you every time. I love it. I really like that.
Thank you.
And I feel, thanks for this reminder, because I feel like I've been passing through nature a lot lately, which is great and it is re-energizing. But yeah, the sit spot, I think, is such a good reminder of just being, you know, in versus taking a walk or a hike and just sort of passing through, which is, yes, a lovely experience. But the sit spot, thank you for that reminder of just being.
Yeah.
Or walking barefoot.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a whole other controversy, whether to sit on something or sit on the ground. There's a lot of people that think very, very passionately about those things, but I think kids' comfort comes first, and then they'll figure out. But if they don't want to sit on the ground, or if they do want to sit on the ground, all the power to them. Yeah.
I was talking to Haley. That wasn't a general comment.
Oh.
Before you go and tell everyone to walk barefoot, there's work to do.
Oh, there was controversy around sit spots at the beginning of the year. Which material is porous and which material is non-porous? So which ones can be sanitized and which ones can't be sanitized? And we actually, one of our team members created a video as to how you can make a sit spot out of 3 plastic bags, grocery bags, and some newspapers. So if you need that, send me an email. I'll send you her little video.
Wow. And then that could even be independent. So my asynchronous time, go out and find a sit spot.
Absolutely.
I love this.
Yeah.
You can also use a plastic clipboard.
Can yoga mats be used in wire deep sea? Jen Lummis, they are porous. Yoga mats cannot be apparently wiped down. So plasticky material, tarps, or like those grocery bags that have the reflection type of material, or grocery, like garbage bags, all the things that can be wiped down apparently are okay. But if you're doing virtual learning, kids can make their own out of materials at home, and then it's not a problem.
Right. And even out on balconies.
Yeah.
Buildings.
Yeah. Just don't make assumptions that all kids have a quiet space, because many of them are in homes that are beyond busy and beyond loud, and they don't actually have a lot of quiet spaces. So I think I had to be really careful about how I worded that. And I often said, find the quietest space that you can find, while checking in with your parents as to where you could go. Because some kids just, they don't have quiet.
Right. Yes, I've learned that through background noise.
Yeah. I think nature sounds is the alternative too, right? So if there's a lot of things going on, if they have earbuds or whatever, to be able to access that and know that's okay. It's a tool that they can use when things are too chaotic. They continue to use it.
Cassandra, we found car mats you can buy by the foot and just cut them into, nice. You guys are the queens and kings over there of creativity, of finding materials and resources over there at Lake Simcoe region. Good idea. Car mats, I would never have thought about that. Maybe, I don't think carpet squares are cool because those are porous, but car mats would work. Anybody else out there? How many people are still here? 32 people. Someone was asking about books, and I referred them to Judy Halpern. So she's like the queen of collating books, and she's often found at COYO conferences or other conferences where she's showcasing environmental and sustainability books. And I think she's might be even doing it. Am I allowed to promote other webinars on this? But she's doing another webinar, I think, coming up where it's based on picture books. So you could check that out. I think it's a free webinar coming up. Oh, Laurel's going to give you a list. Ready for it? She's going to give you a good list right here. She is Judy Halpern's like spirit sister. Yeah. That's what outdoor educators maybe should do this year. I should ask them to create their like a top 10 favorite books that they like to use. I don't think I have, this is one of my faves. I love this book. We ended our 2 weeks with this book talking about memory rocks and how rocks can represent lots of different things. They can be wishing rocks and kicking rocks and splashing rocks, and but at the end it's like it doesn't matter if you just find a rock that just has a memory and those are the best rocks of all. Then just I think it challenges people to think of how they see a rock. And from my learnings from Indigenous communities, I think I was probably guilty of this quite a long time ago, where I was teaching and I would say the rock would be not living. And I think an understanding of rocks being living creatures, or not creatures, but how would you refer to that, Natasha? I know Kim Wheatley corrected me and said they are
animate and filled with spirit.
Yes, animate, filled with spirit. And I've tried to never make that mistake again, because
it's probably the biggest mistake that comes up in grade 1, because you're taught to categorize, right? What's animate and inanimate, and that's entirely based on worldview. Sorry, yes. Tanya, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
it's the end of the day, and if I don't say it now, I won't remember. I think that to say that it's right or wrong based on where students put it is doing a disservice to them. I would say get them to tell you why they think it is, wherever they choose to put it, and open that up to conversation. The rocks have been here for millennia, so they know more stories than any one of us can put together. And so there's lots of teachings around it. I'm not going to go into all of those right now, but just to know that the minerals in the ground and the plants and the animals, all of those things, along with the water, they carry spirit and they carry memory, and they do not require us. We require them. And so that's usually how I explain it.
That's great.
We haven't gone over
no.
in the webinar previously, so thank you everyone who's still here. I know you are here because you want to be, and Laurel, if you want to hop on the screen and share that last resource, you're welcome to. Oh, there.
Hi, I'm trying there. I think I figured it out. I borrowed my husband's laptop because I always do this with the phone, and I finally figured it out. So this is not one necessarily for students.
Nice.
It's definitely one for teachers. This is an absolutely incredible book. And everything that we talk about in terms of however you call a sit spot, in terms of thinking about intimately knowing what I call pedagogy of place, kind of my favorite hashtag that I use for my own work whenever something like this comes up. It's just an absolutely beautiful deep dive into place. And it's also got really wonderful, inspiring stories of some kick-ass women in science. So yeah, I'm just going to say this is kind of I gave away, I think, 50 copies of Braiding Sweetgrass in the last few years. I lost track. Every time I went to the bookstore, I would just buy however many they had. It's still a book I kind of give away a lot, but this is now on my list, equally from a different perspective, but just equally so much love and so much deep connection with place. There you go. My recommendation, and I will tell her on Twitter. Warning, they're coming.
You have never steered me wrong with a book recommendation, Laurel. So I would say everybody go out and buy that, because every single book that you talk about is usually like absolutely beautiful.
Who is the author, Laurel? Who's the author? I lose you? Okay, all right.
I think it's Kelly Brenner.
Okay. Okay.
So,
well, I'll sign off. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful, and I've really enjoyed just this last end of having a little intimate chat. So thank you so much. These are wonderful, wonderful seminars.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Have a great night. We're going to end the webinar now. Thank you. I'm just trying to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Save the chat. Okay, awesome. We'll stop recording. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.